Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. I think first of all, apologies are in order because I've been quite busy the last few weeks and unable to work on the channel until now. But here I am again with a new topic of discussion, and that topic is education. It is a topic that I think rankles many Malaysians, most parents including myself, because of the sorry state the education system is in, despite us paying the government taxes for them to deliver us an acceptable system that works. The truth is it doesn't, and it doesn't prepare our children for the future. And as a result, parents like myself have to resort to alternative solutions, including sending our kids for a private education, overpaying for a private education, and of course, sending our kids abroad to any other country outside of Malaysia for what we believe is a better alternative elsewhere. To discuss this topic, I brought along not one, but two individuals. The first, Dr. Munirah Alatas, has been doing research on education for decades. She's obtained a PhD from Columbia University in New York, and she's done her work and researched and lectured on these topics all over the world, on topics like decolonization, the economy, geopolitics, and education in universities that have included the International Islamic University in Indonesia and, of course, University of Malaya back home. The other individual is Adzhar Ibrahim, who's not only a good friend of mine and a traveling companion, he's also been a Chief Human Resource Officer for decades, having first obtained that lofty title at the tender age of 29. He's worked at companies that have included AirAsia, Maxis, Digi, and Standard Chartered, and he retired some 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, he knows one or two things about spotting a quality individual. Before we start, if I can, make a plea to all of you, because the vast majority of people who watch the content on my channel are not subscribers, so if you could please do go that extra step and subscribe to the channel. You'll go a great distance in helping me get ever better and more quality individuals, not just in Malaysia, but also abroad in the region, to talk on the podcast about topics of interest to everybody. And so now, dear viewers, without further ado, may I present Dr. Munirah Alatas and Adzhar Ibrahim to talk about education. Adzhar, Munirah, thank you both for coming on. I know you're very busy people, and so in advance, I'd like to thank you both for spending your morning with me. Let's start the discussion by you both giving us, a short snapshot of what you both have done in your work and your career so far. Maybe with you, Munirah, first.
Or maybe age before beauty.
Yeah.
Pearl before cow. I know that joke. Thank you, Chuang. I'm not that busy. I'm retired. I'll go anywhere for a free coffee. So thanks for the coffee. I retired from corporate work about 5 years ago, just before the pandemic. Before that, I spent over 40 years with various private sector companies, American, British, Norwegian, and some Malaysian companies too. I started out by being in human resource. Now I think human resource has become some alphabet soup that I myself can't really recognize. But I spent 40 years doing that, and I got to the top quite early. I became a CHRO, as it is called now, barely when I was 29. So after about 10 years of doing that job, I realized that my career was plateauing. And then I also realized that I'm perfectly happy with it. I'm okay with the plateauing because to me, the job was just one part of my life. I realized that I don't mind being a big fish in a small pond because I have many ponds that I'm interested in. So I pretty much chose to retire when I was about 62 because I think I still have some strength and energy to go out there and do a lot of other things that I want to do, which is first and foremost traveling. And I've done quite a lot of traveling, my own kind of traveling, and you've been on some of those trips, which is long overland drives over exotic parts of the world. And that's how I'm spending my children's inheritance. And
very good. Adzhar, I think you're being too humble because I think some of the companies you work with include multinationals like Standard Chartered. You work for big PLCs in Malaysia like AirAsia as well. Of course, you've been with Maxis and Digi as well, all of them as CHRO. So I know you turned CHRO promoted before 30 years old, which is a big achievement. And you've been at the pinnacle for, all that duration, 40 plus years. So because today's topic is about education and about its correlation with the real world, I think you have some good comments in terms of what makes a good performance in the corporate world, what makes high performance teams, what makes either, how people amount to whether a company is good, great, or average, right? So we're going to get those insights from you. Munirah, what about you? What's the sum total as it stands?
Well, Chuan, thank you very much for inviting me this is my first podcast, actually.
Great.
So I'm very chuffed about experiencing it
Deeply
for
honored.
the first time. About my background, well, many people don't realize, but I actually grew up in Singapore, but have always been a Malaysian citizen, and I grew up in a largely academic household. So basically, I chose that career path, not because anyone forced me, but mainly because I was accustomed and grew to like the lifestyle and the tortured lifestyle that an academic goes through. So after about 18 years of life in Singapore, I went to the United States, not on any government scholarship. It was purely for my, as an undergraduate, my father had sponsored me. And after that, graduate school, master's and PhD, I got a fellowship from the university, Columbia University. So basically, I then lived in the United States for a very long time, in New York, where I did my PhD, which was at Columbia, and then returned, not to Singapore, but decided to make that choice to live in Malaysia. And I'm very happy with that choice. So I started off working as a researcher at ISIS and then IDFR before joining UKM. But all this while, beginning to understand the rot in academia, not just in Malaysia, but also globally. But we can discuss that later. And as Adzhar himself has said, there's more to life than just the job they're holding. So I consistently have loved sports, and that's what I constantly do as well. We'll speak more about my interest in sports later, but that's about the introduction I would like to.
Yeah, I think you've also researched and done reports extensively on decolonization as well. You've got very interesting views on international relations. Malaysia, of course, as a topic, and education is a bugbear for you, lah. So I know that in Malaysia, the education system is in a massive state of disrepair. Everybody seems to have a consensus on that. But before we talk about the challenges of the system, let's start the discussion on a constructive note, right? What is going right with the system? Maybe, Adzhar, you first?
If I were to go back to when I grew up, where my parents were both basically illiterate, and so were most of my peers and the kids in the kampung.
You're from Penang, right?
I'm from Penang,
yeah.
but on the kampung side of Penang, not the city side of Penang. But nowadays, almost everybody is literate. Almost every kid have the opportunity to go to school, and schooling is available everywhere, basically all the way up to higher secondary, and it's pretty much very cheap or free. And you obviously have the option to go and pay more and get perhaps better quality education in private and international school. But I think as a nation, over the decades of independence, I think we got that part right. We can talk later about the part that we didn't get wrong, but I would acknowledge to say that part we got it right.
Munirah?
Okay, taking off from that, yes, I would agree. We have accessible education. A majority of the population has access. But then again, having too much to offer can also prove challenging for quality. To have too many private universities, for instance, you then begin to question the quality that is being offered. But essentially, I would say one positive is that we have a very affordable education system. The cost to educate, the cost of doing a bachelor's, for instance, in a public system is minimal compared to many other countries. So I think we need to acknowledge that. But that is the extent of the positives as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot more that has been able to cancel that that positive aspect of our education.
Yeah, I mean, recently I was talking to a friend of mine whose child is in MU actually, studying finance. And I think his degree was like, I think 4,000 ringgit a year, which is very, very achievable for most Malaysians, even, in lower grade income households. But before we talk about the Malaysian challenges in education, let's talk about what education means in the first place, because I think we throw this term around quite loosely, without understanding, without really questioning it ourselves. What is education? What does it mean? Why does it matter, right? Maybe, Adzhar, what is education? Because I know you've got several children. You've done very well by them because they're all working, graduated with honours, etc. But as a father, and as a peer as well, what does education mean?
I guess the only way that, or perhaps the best way to see education is that it is a preparation for the life that you're going to lead later on. Of course, you also have to admit that education never ends. This thing about lifelong learning and all that is very, very real and very true. But to me, it's preparing you to become a good human being. And a good human being is obviously somebody who have the right moral, the right ability to earn a good, make a living so that later on he or she can have a family, and sustainable and resilient. So I guess education is probably a combination of opening your mind up so that you understand the world, you understand what goes on in it, and preparing you and training you to become a sustainable person, to become a resilient and sustainable person who will not be a burden on other people. And the balance sometimes goes here and there, left and right, depending on what we are looking at. But I think both of those aspects have to be part of a good education system.
Well, I would say there are two parts to the question. First is, what is the meaning of informal education? And then we have formal education. Both together prepare a human being for life, not what job to get. I mean, this is the fundamental issue. We don't go to school or to university to prepare yourself to get a job. At least that's how I look at it. And that's where we have lost direction. This is not to say that you don't learn the essentials or the fundamentals of any trade that you may be interested in. But the focus has been largely because of the concentration of corporatizing education, the role of business in education in universities. Because of this development, we now train people to get jobs. We don't train them, as Adzhar said, to how to live a good life. For instance, to give you an example, universities are supposed to run philosophy classes and learn the classics, philosophical classics, to learn about intercivilizational dialogue, what people discussed in different cultures, how each one is feeding off the other, differences. In Malaysian universities, we've done away with that. We don't have, we hardly have, I think philosophy departments are shutting down everywhere in the public system at least, and globally in fact. Now, to me, this is a crime, an educational crime, and it's a humanitarian problem because we have lost the ability to question the meaning of life. The meaning of life now is directed at how much you earn when you graduate, or I want to be a politician because I need to earn this amount of money. Not because, if you know the philosophy of life, you will become a politician because you care about the people you are serving, not how much allowance you're going to get. So, I mean, in a nutshell, it's a very big nutshell, but in a nutshell, the purpose of education is to prepare you how to live a good, happy life.
By the way, a politician doesn't grow up specifying how much he or she wants to make. A politician grows up asking for a blank check, basically. Coming back to your point about the corporatization of education, I think that's true, that has happened. But I think even before education became corporatized, because of the nature of the capitalist society that we live in over the last few hundred years, university became seen as a source of workforce. Obviously you need the engineers, and you need the accountants, and you need the marketeers, and you need the salespeople, and you also need all kind of other vocational things. So even in a country that probably you can say have absolutely no corporatization at all, perhaps a country like Cuba, for example, they're still producing people who are supposed to be useful entries into the workforce. It has just become worse because of the corporatization of the institution.
Right, you're right. And if I may say, there's nothing inherently wrong with capitalism, but what is wrong now are the excesses.
Well, it's taken the front foot, hasn't it? Which is the problem, because you are training people to make money without realizing what it takes to be a good person and to be a valuable member of society, which is what you talk about with the formal education system and the informal education system, right? But the key omission here, I think both of you agree on, is the corporatization of the education system. But in Malaysia, there's also the politicization of the education system, which has further, I think, diluted the issues inherent within. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that the political interference, I'll focus my comments mainly on the university system. I would say the political interference has gone overboard, and it has been taking place gradually, and now it has sped up over about 3 or 4 decades now, in the choice of who leads our universities. Now, when you have political decisions being made at that top level, influencing who the VCs are, and mind you, most of the public universities are headed by VCs who are from the engineering or the hard sciences. You hardly have social scientists who are able to break down the problems of society and channel values of social science as well into running a university, the kind of curriculum you should have, the kind of students or mentors we should have for students. It's all about how much profit the university has to make at the end of the academic year. I'm not saying it's not important, but politics has influenced the kind of leadership universities have had, the kind of political games that universities participate in. By this I mean VCs are reluctant to speak out against wrong policy for fear of offending the politician who put them there in the first place. So I'm saying this is interfering. I wouldn't say taking government out of the university is 100% a positive thing. We need some level of give and take between the state and the university. But to interfere in the kind of, to say that VCs are appointed because he or she is a supporter of a particular political party, and not to make comments to criticize policy, that's wrong, because the function of a university is as a check and balance for policy. And that's not taking place in Malaysia.
Adzhar, comments?
The politicization of our education system, I think, is more insidious than just what's happening at universities. I think it happened throughout the entire political system. And I call it, and perhaps I'm not even original in that, it's like the dumbing down of our education system. I think politicians at some point, our politician anyway, decided that having a set of young people who are well-educated, open-minded, challenging, conscious of their rights as well as their responsibility is just too inconvenient. So I don't think anybody sat behind any closed door at any point in the past and say, let's create stupid people, let's make sure we have dungus passing through our education system. But I think there was a conscious effort of saying that we don't really need people to be too smart. We don't want them educated, really. We want them trained. Maybe trained as a lawyer, as a dentist, as a doctor, but trained rather than educated. Because education is like what we discussed earlier on, the opening of mind and the sharpening of your tool to be able to take on the challenges of life later on. But I think the dumbing down started very early on, and then it just carried on throughout the entire education process. And by the time you get to the university, it's pretty much too late already to do anything to revert that decline.
So back in the 18th or was it 17th or was it 16th century when University of Cambridge and Oxford came to be, as you were saying, Munirah, philosophy was a key element of teaching in those universities. And I think till today, the PPE degree in Oxford or Cambridge is one of the most sought after. And PPE essentially stands for Politics, Philosophy and Economics, which is basically the sum total of what you need to learn to be a well-rounded individual in the real world. Could it be that philosophy was taken out of the curriculum because they do not want thinkers, questioners, critical observers of the system?
Well,
was it as concerted as that? I mean, what do you think?
Okay, the universities emerged, I would say, in the 11th century much earlier, okay? And not just in the West. In fact, the first university that emerged was actually in what we now term the Middle East, okay? But really, we have gone astray in terms of learning about the classics, which is what the original purpose of the university was meant for. It was to learn the classics, and not just philosophy, but literature, poetry, music, language. Now, these are courses that actually educate somebody how to be a critical thinker. Obviously, when corporatization took over, these courses become useless because it takes time, it's expensive to train too many experts on too many courses. It's better to narrow them down. It's better to just run economics classes or politics classes. We can do away with philosophy because, as Adzhar earlier said, it's part of the dumbing down process, but also taking off from what Adzhar mentioned earlier about the schools. If you notice, whenever we talk about education, we conveniently forget a key element of it, which is teacher education. We're only talking about quota systems or vernacular schools. We don't really focus on the quality of the teachers in these schools or the quality of the lecturers in the universities. They themselves are not educated in the classics. They themselves learn to doctor history, which is something the original universities will tell you not to do. The first universities are not going to say history is meant to be doctored and altered. Freehand, change what you think about your own history so that you can get ahead politically. I mean, these are basic ethics that universities also taught, you see.
And in fact, in that very same vein, some of the more famous philosophers like the Senecas of this world or the Marcus Aurelius of this world, the so-called Stoics, right? The Greek Stoics, who actually shunned material wealth and actually said, they actually propagated a life of simplicity, which is inconvenient, not only inconvenient, but it's also running counter to the political and capitalist system of today, which is, again, not convenient to the powers that be, right? When you were working at CHRO and all those PLCs, Adzhar, you got people applying to the companies with degrees from such and such university in such and such discipline, right? What did you, in your work as a CHRO, what kind of individuals usually did the best in the corporate world? What success factors did you see?
Okay, before I answer that, Chuang, let me just address the point that you made about philosophy.
The Stoics.
I think what we are too familiar with is probably the Western philosophy side of things, Aristotle, Socrates, and the Stoics and all that kind of stuff. But if we were to talk about real philosophy, there's Eastern philosophy too. There's all kind of philosophy which are just as valuable, just as valid. And sometimes I think we became a bit too hung up on the fact that, that is the colonists' philosophy, so we don't want to learn that. We only want to learn our philosophy. And I think that happened quite a lot. But I think it went too far to the extent that, like what you said, they decided let's not learn about philosophy at all because somehow they can't see any use about understanding how humans should live their life, which is really a pity. Coming back to your question, as the person sort of who was the recipient of the product of our education system, I saw the quality deteriorating over the 4 decades that I work, which is unfortunate. There's still good one who comes through, and our job in human resources is to make sure that we get a good one and not our competitor. And our idea of what is a good one varies. I was in one particular company where they gave fantastic scholarship to go to Oxbridge and all that. And everything was based on how good your grades are. Yeah. It's almost purely based on how good your grades are. Grades are a good indicator, obviously. But to survive and to do well within a corporate setting, you need more than just brain. You need heart, you need resilience, you need the ability to communicate, you need the ability to work together as a team. And some of these things are not really taught in school, again, for a simple reason that many people seem to think that this soft kind of thing is not very valuable. Teach them how to do calculation, teach them how to build things, teach them how to make things, teach them how to keep numbers or whatever it is, but I don't really bother to teach them about some of the softer issues, whether it is philosophy or whether it is about personal communication or whether it is about personal development and personal growth. That has never really appeared in most curriculum, and I don't think they will, given the way things are going.
I don't know whether you're going to be willing to name him, but I want to raise the leader, the CEO that you used to report to in one of your former employers, who you hold in quite high esteem, obviously Scandinavian, and one of the most forward-thinking CEOs that you worked under. What attributes did he have, do you think? You can name him if you want, but what attributes did he have that made you respect him that much? And did those attributes come from university, or do you think that he got it from the way of life that he had growing up?
Well, that particular boss, he graduated in finance, and he also had the MBA that most corporate managers have, and he also worked as a consultant. So technically, you can say there are 3 strikes against him. He definitely was heading in the wrong direction, but he didn't. I think he is somebody who cares about the other stuff that we were talking about, the philosophy, he cares about art, he cares about culture and all that kind of thing. And he just happened to use the training that he had in finance to make his work easier. But the main driver of how he drove the business was not the numbers, not the thing that he learned in MBA classes, not the thing that he learned as a consultant, not the thing that he learned in his finance classes, but the understanding of human psychology, the understanding of what makes us tick. And I don't think he learned any of that in school. I think perhaps he himself was just a curious personality. Perhaps he was brought up in the right kind of family who put a focus on this kind of thing. And those were the things that made him very, very successful. And you know how successful he was in business, one of the most successful corporate story in Malaysia. But it didn't come from the degree in finance, it didn't come from the MBA, even though it was from a top school, and it definitely didn't come from his background with being a consultant with one of the top consulting firms.
Yeah, I would now like to re-emphasize what I mentioned earlier about informal education. As you said, the home, okay, how you are brought up, how you are influenced, the milieu, who you play with. It's very important. You learn morality and ethics, not just through religious classes also. You have to see good deeds being done, good statements being made, compromises being done in front of your eyes to learn the value of it. Now, if within your own family, for instance, growing up, if you see parents, if you have parents who allow you to go on your basika laja or to be a mat rampit, of course, when you're a kid, you love it. You think your parents are great people for allowing you to do that. But eventually, they're going to realize that's the wrong kind of upbringing to experience. And you're going to go astray. You're not going to find the value in other aspects of life that make you a good human being or make you a critical thinker. Risk-taking is probably good in certain aspects, but not throughout your life. So I think the home is very important, and we have lost sight in terms of, I've been to restaurants, or I've sat in the park, or people gathering as a family, having lunch. Everybody is looking at their phones, no conversation. At home, it also happens. What kind of value system is that? Now, of course, I can get a lot of flack. You're an old person, you don't understand the younger generation. The phone is very important. But so is human interaction. So is sharing, the father or the mother asking their child or their children, how was your day? What did you do in school? What did your teacher tell you? Do you know what's happening in the news today? These things need to be spoken to. There needs to be eye contact. I find this a very challenging problem that exists in the 21st century. And it's about moderation. Technology is important, yes, but we have gone astray. We have not been able to moderate that.
You have, Munirah, lived both in the greatest city in the world, New York City, and you now live in the world's second greatest city, Kuala Lumpur. Compare and contrast, because you've also read, at Columbia, which is one of the top 10 Ivy League universities in America, and a lot of people will also say that the U.S. education system is in a shambles, right? Maybe if you can reflect on those two periods of your life and compare and contrast the two. What was so great and what was so bad?
About the universities or about life?
I mean, life in New York, life in Columbia, life in Malaysia, life in UKM.
I would say that life at Columbia was excellent. It was fantastic because of the debates we would have. Debates in class. Sometimes the lecturer, the professor would come in and give a 10-minute lecture without slides. But I was in history and political science, and I took philosophy classes. I think at that time, slides were frowned upon if you were learning, a humanities or social science subject. But nevertheless, in the 80s, it was not a big thing. Sometimes he or she would lecture for 10 minutes and then decide, wait a minute, let's have a free-for-all discussion.
Fantastic.
And there would be arguments, there would be challenges to the professor's viewpoints. That doesn't exist in the universities today, in the class, in the lecture halls today.
In Malaysia.
It doesn't. But again, as I mentioned, globally the quality has declined, and I would relate that again to university ranking system, which is closely tied in with corporatization. This is ruining the American system. It's ruining the European system as well. But thankfully, in those countries, there is a huge movement against it. Whereas in Malaysia, we are still just discussing the problems, but we are not really pinpointing people like me and a few others in the academic movement, Negara, that I belong to. A few of us are very concerned about the way the ranking system has jeopardized the quality of university education. But policy-wise, the ministry has not caught on sitting down at the table and discussing how do we do it? How do we break away from the ranking system, come up with different policies, retain some form of the ranking system, but not everything, not 100% of it. We haven't got to that decision-making level yet on how to redirect policy. A lot of criticism, yes, a lot of knowledge about it, but we haven't done the nitty-gritty work yet. Whereas in the West, in Europe, in America, there is a huge movement. And it's not just at the lecturer's level, it's also at the student level. We don't have that here.
The ranking system is actually something very, very pernicious because it doesn't just affect the public universities, it also affects, to the same degree or maybe even more, the private universities. If you go by the ranking of some of the private universities in Malaysia, you would have thought that we have some of the best universities in the world. Top 50 universities in the world. I mean, why the hell are you sending people to Columbia or any of those top universities when we have it right here in our doorstep? Obviously, if you are in it for the money, and that by itself is not wrong, but if you are in it for the money and you really care too much about the money, then you start playing the game and you start gaming the system. So whatever ranking that you have, which could be very convenient for you when you do your marketing, doesn't reflect the real quality of your education that you provide at all. So it is bad in the public sector. It is equally bad in the private sector also.
So because the system has been hijacked by political interest and by corporate interest, I think that's basically inarguable. It's actually happened, and it's happened for a long time. There's also been a concurrent movement where you've seen the balance of power and decision-making shift back towards the family and the household, right? You see the move towards homeschooling, for example. You see the move towards TVET and technical skills, for example, away from the 3-year degree program, because the ROI on those programs is just ridiculous, right? You pay a vast amount of money and you're locked in university for 3 years. You come out with a degree which basically earns you a salary not much higher than the median average in Malaysia, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what I'm saying is that I think there's a cohort of people in Malaysia and around the world, in fact, that seem to be taking things into their own hands. I think as a parent myself, that's what I'm seriously considering for my children, because why would I go and spend an arm and a leg to send them to some university to come up with a degree which will be disrupted by the robots in the future anyway, if not in the present, by ChatGPT or what, for example, right? How do you guys view what's happening with society? If you had children today, right, how would you think about preparing them for the future?
I do have children.
But they're grown up, right? So if you had fresh children now, today, right? Say 15 years old, right?
My children are generally fresh.
Sorry, fresh off the conveyor belt. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Fresh out of the oven.
I have 4 children. Yeah. 2 of them decided that the moment they graduated, they just want to throw away their book and never see them again. And they went into corporates and they hustle and they pivot and they do the usual corporate stuff. The other 2 children kept on studying and studying and studying and studying. So for the 2 of them, currently they have about 7 degrees between them.
Wow.
And they could end up having more as they go along. And I'm fairly happy with that, because I think probably that is the most interesting way of doing life. Be a bit of a corporate person who knows how to earn money and have a good living, but not to take it too seriously, because there is so many other aspects of life which are also interesting, stuff that you can study if you go to university, stay in university, continuing study at university, as well as, of course, studying elsewhere and on the outside also, which is possible now because of technology, the internet, and all that. So, personally myself, I went to university to study physics. It's my love then, and it's still my love now. I love the hard sciences, but I wasn't very good at it, so I ended up studying philosophy of science, which to me is probably the most interesting thing of, okay, there's the hardcore science of what happened, and there's the philosophy side of science asking why did that happen. And I found that very interesting, but I never got anywhere with it, so I'm actually a college dropout. Didn't do too badly for a college dropout, but in reality, I am a college dropout. I always say that you need to have 2 things to help you in life. One is qualification, the other one is education. And they're not necessarily the same thing. Yeah. If between those 2 you have to choose one, please choose education. Unfortunately, most of people today, they choose qualification. So they can go around with multiple pieces of paper to say that I'm graduated from here, I have this degree, I have this qualification, I have this grade. So they have all of the qualification, but when you talk to them, when you try to employ them, when you try to mix around with them, you discover that they're not very educated. Right. They are highly trained maybe in that particular sector, if at all, yes. Sometimes not even that. But they have absolutely no perspective about what is going on elsewhere, and they have absolutely nothing much to offer about anything above and beyond the narrow thing that they studied. I remember interviewing a young girl many years ago who came out with a first degree in accounting from one of those European universities. And I thought, okay, that looks impressive enough. And I started talking to her. I said, what do you think about the current economic crisis that's going on? It was probably around 15 or 20 years ago. And she had absolutely nothing to say. And I thought, is your interest purely to make sure that you graduate with a good grade and have a nice piece of paper to come home? Or was it driven by some interest about numbers and about accounts and about finance, about what's happening in the world? So obviously in that particular case and in many similar cases, all they care about is just get me a piece of paper
Getting
so that I
a
can
job.
go up there to get a job.
You see, excuse me for interrupting, but you made a very important point. This person you interviewed knew accounting, but enough to get a job, and she strove to get that good degree because she wanted a job. But let's not blame her 100% because she's a product of the rotten school system.
Yeah.
And if we had trained teachers to tell the students that eventually many of you will go to university, but please understand you will go to university to get a qualification, but there's a lot of education behind that qualification.
Yeah.
The teachers have to tell these students that they have to feel it themselves.
So why? Okay, let me just turn this whole thing on its head, right, and offer a very contrarian view, right? As a parent myself, right, what is the possibility of families today saying, screw the education system, screw the government, let's not rely on them to change their ways and to reform the education system. Why don't we take things into our own hands? Perhaps even consider not sending them to school. Perhaps consider not even sending them to university. Because at the end of the day, you talk about soft skills, you talk about hard skills, right? The hard skills are in university where you get a qualification, you get a job. But in truth, you can actually learn anything on the internet for free today, and you get all these free courses from which you can get certifications, right? It's far more affordable. In fact, some of them are free. And in the school of life, you don't need a university because, well, not necessarily anyway, unless you go to one of the liberal places, right? You can learn it from your peers, you can learn it from your parents, you can learn it from your social groups. Would you disagree? How would you do that? Because if we're trying to outsource this whole duty to this edifice of government, well, I think we're in a lot of pain.
We are. I mean, it's a fantastic attitude to take, and I feel 100% that we should all do that. But we also have to live in reality. And I am calling for a middle ground where the two can meet. There's no harm participating in homeschooling. But at the same time, at some point, your charges have to go through the socialization process of being in a classroom setting, of interacting and socializing with their peers, to learn how it is to debate, to challenge a point of view among strangers, okay? Not just through the internet or through the screen. So there has to be a meeting, a coming to a middle ground. I would say in the Malaysian system, it's very difficult to reform all the damage that has been done. But I'm not going to stop saying that it needs to be reformed. We're now in a political crisis since 2018. We've had so many different governments, and now we have to grapple with a coalition government. So there are other added problems because of that. And if you notice, talk about education reform is kind of on the back burner. So I'm even more cynical about it right now, the last year or so. But at the same time, I'm not going to stop talking about it because I understand that reforming an education system takes generations. And it means we need a new generation of leaders. And what can I say? We just have to wait for all the old ones to die off. And the new ones have to come up. But where are we getting these new crop of leaders from? The same system.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's a vicious cycle or circle.
Yeah.
And we need to constantly talk about it ad nauseum.
I'm not a fan of homeschooling because my own definition of what education should be all about is preparing you for life. And life is where you have to go out and mix around with people, whether at work or in society or with friends or in family. And if you spend your most formative year alone, glued to a screen or to the headphone, you wouldn't fulfill part of the needs of education, which is you become trained. You can do the math, you can do the science, you can do the essay, you can do this, you can do that. But I think you are missing out something which is even more important. Being out there, making friends, making enemies, having fun, failing, succeeding. Because once
Building
you enter
confidence.
Once you enter the workforce, if all you have ever done is stayed at home and studied book and come up with good grade, you will be very, very unprepared for the real life that you're going to see when you enter the workforce. Because most of us will enter the workforce.
Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of the new generation have taken things into their own hands. They have not had a life of being stuck behind a screen at home. What they've done at a very early age, and I've seen, for example, content creators on YouTube as early as 13, 14, 15 years old, learn the tricks and trades of these new platforms, and they're monetizing these things at a vast amount of money, right? At a very, very young age. In fact, at such a young age that their parents have to take care of the money for them. I've seen some of these kids, they learn these skills by themselves from social media. They live abroad in Bali, in places like Portugal, and they're in their 20s, and they're earning huge amounts of money on the internet, in the digital economy, whether it's a programmer, whether it's a music producer for sound bits like Epidemic Sounds, whether it's a content creator on YouTube, and they're making good money for themselves, and they're not in university per se. They're actually living abroad, engaging with new cultures, meeting new people, learning new social skills on their own. And I think there's a repudiation among the younger sets about what's happening because of us and our generation and the generations before us. Just like how they view, home ownership or even car ownership and even the family structure. Things are moving so fast. I think the younger set have actually taken things into their own hands and done these things by themselves. I'm not sure whether you've actually come across some of them, but they amaze me sometimes with their abilities.
True, but I would say they are outliers, and they are always outliers in history. Yeah. If you go back to Steve Jobs, if you go back to Bill Gates and all that, they also decided that I don't want to go to university, or I want to quit university, I want to go and do my thing. And these are the outliers, so by definition, they are like a small minority of the people out there. So assuming that they are doing well, and many of them are doing well, we know that. Oh, actually, we don't really know that, because sometimes behind the reality, behind all of those nice stuff, it could be very different. But even if they are doing well, sometimes I just feel that, you need to grow up. You need to learn how to grow up. You need to take your time growing up. Being a global sensation at 13 or 14 or 15 is going to set you up for disappointment down the road. Very few of them will come out of that well. And even if that is a viable option, it cannot apply to the other 95% or 98% of the population. And they're still going to have to go through a much more industrialized way of training and educating people, because these options are not open to them.
Do you think as parents we can introduce these ideas of lifelong learning, about resilience, about endurance, about diligence, industry, hard work, humility?
Yes, we should, right?
It's
not whether
we
can, we should, we must.
Yes.
The thing is, we are not, because we ourselves, we are of that generation who have had parents who have had a different mindset and outlook in life. But I see younger parents, in their 40s with very young children. They have a totally different outlook on life. The outlook on life is to immediately buy a house and at least have 2 cars, and very brand conscious. The kind of phones they have, electronic equipments, the kind of vacations they talk about, it's very brand conscious. Again, this goes back to the capitalist outlook.
And so they don't mind putting their children through that
they
industrial
don't
system.
Mind, because their value system is passed on to their children. So I worry about the next generation, you see. We are always saying, Malaysia's future lies in the younger generation. Well, I will say yes half-heartedly, because I'm worried about what the mindset, who these younger generations, who their parents are. Adzhar has 17 cars, but I've learned that
17 jungs.
I learned that these are not, these are collector's items, which is different. it doesn't matter. The point is quantity versus quality.
Yeah.
And we need to take note of the fact that capitalism has bred this value system that quantity is to be cherished over quality. And it goes back to the quantity or the quality of education offered versus the quantity of courses and universities out there. And this is having a detrimental effect on humanity, I would say.
My biggest concern is about moral. Parents are outsourcing the teaching of morality to schools, and obviously in school of the old days that cared about philosophy and history and civilization may do a better job than currently, where morality, especially in Malaysian setting, especially among the Malaysian Muslim, is purely about regurgitating whatever your religious teachers and the curriculum tells you to do. Which is the reason why, even though over the last few decades we have had a much more intensive religious education program, it doesn't reflect in the overall morality of the people out there, the people who were the products of this education over the last few decades. We have just as many crooks, as many corrupted people, whether in politics or in business or anywhere else, as before. And the reason is because parents somehow feel that let the school take care of it. Let the school educate them, prepare them for work, and prepare them for life. I just feel that the number one job for parents is to prepare and give the right moral guidance to the children. They must understand what is right, what is wrong. How do you live your life among other people? How do you behave? How do you become a useful member of society? We don't do that. We just let the school, or hope the school will take care of that. And the school, given the politicization issue that we talk about, given the corporatization issue that we talk about, don't really care about this because this doesn't make money. And this doesn't appear in any university ranking out there in the world either. So who cares about that?
I mean, if there's a young couple who got married, if, let's say, hypothetically, a young couple gets married yesterday and 22 years old, they are immediately planning to have at least 4 kids, if not 6. Now, I mean, this is the mentality. This is the 21st century. They would say, well, I need to work. I need to outsource because I have so many mouths to feed. I mean, this is a real problem, yes. But that's where the state has to step in and say, advise and not force, but advise and say, rather than having 4 kids, have 3 or 2. I'm not saying social engineering in that sense, but put it out there that it's better to have less because less is more.
But Munirah, how can you expect the state to have that perspective when they don't clearly have that perspective? How can you outsource the responsibility of being rational and prudent and wise with your family? How can you outsource that message to the government when they themselves don't have that perspective?
Okay, let me answer this one. The government doesn't have that perspective now, but it used to have it.
Correct.
Decades ago, there were talks about family planning. There was a lot of talks about family planning, about having smaller families rather than about having bigger families and considering it to be gift. I mean, how can you call many children gift if half of them ended up being drug addicts or criminals or politicians and all of those shit that happen out there?
Category.
Same category. I mean, those are not gifts. You are being utterly irresponsible. But it is inconvenient now for today's politician to push that particular message because for most of today's politicians, what they care about is what they can exploit. And among our populace, most of what they can exploit, the best thing that they can exploit are the votes. And the vote come with the number of people, because the more people mean more vote. And the dumber the people, the easier to get their votes. So both of those things are not going well for us because of these two.
How can young parents or parents-to-be gain that perspective and not relegate that responsibility by outsourcing that to the government? Because clearly the government don't have that ability, right? Yeah. And we, as a habit nowadays, we talk about this a lot of times, right? Financial security is outsourced, right? The care of our children is outsourced. even our physical health is outsourced to the gym instructors and what have you. And of course, this whole perspective about having about family planning is outsourced to. We expect the government to step in all the time. Right. We cannot, because the government does not have that ability.
This is where.
So how can we make young parents, or how can we, I don't know, offer this perspective? How can young parents gain this perspective by themselves? Can they do that?
I think more and more podcasts like yours, Chuan, and influencers who are of a much younger cohort, I think many of them are aware of this problem. So it needs to be verbalized, it needs to be repeated on and on. Talk shows, we need to discuss this rather than just the nuts and bolts of how to make money and how much percentage of your money should you save and retirement. You need to talk about the real goals of living, of life, the soft things, as you mentioned earlier.
I have
Go ahead.
I have regular debate with a very good friend of mine. She is somebody who's a highly accomplished medical specialist who spend a lot of her time helping people, whether they are migrants or poor kids and all that kind of stuff. And she gets frustrated with her ability to change things, because sometimes the more you do, the worse things become. Yeah. And I say that my belief is there's no way I can change the big picture. I'm not big enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not powerful enough. And I don't want to be big or smart or powerful, because by the time I get there, I would have been corrupted myself. Okay. What I could do is I just focus on the small circle around me, right. My own family. Hopefully, I've given them the right message, and hopefully it made sense to them. Hopefully, I've given them all the opportunity for them to try to do their best. The friends around me, the people who I work with, I try to focus on a small circle and not the big circle, because I don't have a podcast like some people here.
But
you can and you should. Everybody should have one.
I would say change by example. For instance, let me just give you a very real development in my own life. I sold my house, which was in the suburbs, specifically because I wanted to live a lifestyle of walking rather than driving.
Fantastic.
Okay? I made that conscious decision because I'm fed up with the stress of commuting, of driving around. The traffic is getting worse. So I moved to KL. I made that conscious decision for an initial, it's an upheaval of your life. I've lived more than 2 decades in this particular place. I've moved. So I now don't use the car. I walk. I'm a lot more health conscious. I've taken up indoor rowing because of the pandemic. I couldn't play golf anymore. I used to walk 9 holes. Couldn't do that during the pandemic. So I needed to find something to do at home. So I'm very health conscious. Young people have to see these examples in their peers or in their parents, I would say, in the older generation. If you don't live by example, nobody's going to follow you and emulate you. You can talk a lot, but I would say that about the politicians too. They talk a lot, but they don't show the example. This is how change takes place.
I'm almost the polar opposite of you, but I think I made the same choice as you did. My choice much earlier on was, I'm a kampong boy. I love space. I love greenery. I hate crowd. I hate buildings. Just talking about it, I think my stress level goes up. So I chose to stay out of the city. I stayed 30, 40 kilometers away. There was one job that I did for 5 years where I was doing almost 200 kilometers of commuting every day. Wow. Going through 14 toll booths. But it was okay with me because it allowed me to go back home to where I like, to my trees, to my animal, to my pets, to my collection of junks that I have. But again, it's a choice. And I made a conscious choice, not just following like lemmings to say that you need to stay in the right postcode, have the right kind of house, drive the right kind of car, be seen in the right kind of places. Right. which is not something that I cared about very much.
Can I just say, and I hope you will, accommodate me here, Adzhar, because, during our travels in Tibet, you did talk about how the high respect you had for your parents, and your parents were essentially kampung people, and you talked about how they're illiterate, but they put in you a foundation which made you the person you are. You're an independent thinker. You don't follow the crowd. You've got a very clear perspective of what is right and what is wrong. Can you talk about your parents and the kind of principles they shared?
Probably going to be a bit difficult because I get emotional every time I do that. But both my mother and my father were the single greatest influence on my life. I mean, they didn't teach me anything about school and education and all that, because my father had 2 years of primary education and my mother was basically illiterate. She went to the scholar, there was a thing, but she probably flunked it. So they were illiterate, but they had wisdom. They may not have intelligence the way that we measure it through IQ and all that, but they had wisdom. They had the ability to see the big picture and put their own moral compass on it and decide what is right and what is wrong. So even when I was grown up, there was many decisions in the family that I made because I was like the best earning member of the family. So I made those decisions, but there was some other decision that I will just go to my mother or my father and say, you decide. And whatever that they tell me, I will accept it because I have trust in them. Is it because they are better people than other people? Not necessarily, but I think they just care more about their responsibility. They were super religious, so they care about their responsibility to God also. That they must produce children who are good in terms of morale, God-fearing, and useful to society, helping other people. So when you get that from very early on, I think it does help to set you in the right direction. If you don't get that, it's very difficult for schools and colleges and university and your workplace to try to inculcate that into you, because I think that was missing at the point when it was at its most formative.
Yeah, absolutely no correlation between education and material wealth, and just values, right? Values are here, not all these material things. What about you, Munirah? Where do you get your sense of perspective and purpose?
Well, I think definitely my parents were very influential. Of course, it helps that I had a father who was an academic, so he didn't have a 9-to-5 job where he had to be away from the house for specific numbers of hours a day.
Your father is actually quite a prominent individual as well. Do you want to talk about him as well?
Well, yes. Syed Hussein Alatas is my father. Yeah. But growing up in a household with him as father and my mother, of course, not many people know this, but I'm from a biracial background. My mother was Indian, my late mother. So very early on in life, I learned that diversity is not something strange. Ethnic diversity or ethnic difference is nothing strange. Growing up in Singapore, of course, helped because it's a different society there. But what I learned growing up is the value of patience. To be patient in developing your interests, to be patient in dealing with people. Morality and ethics was very much within the household conversation, but it was not connected with being a religious or a ritualistic household. Morality was what it is. Morality as a human value rather than only a religious value. So we were not much into rituals, talking about, do this 10 times a day or 6 times a day or what have you. Basically, how you interact with people has to be have a foundational, ethical foundation. I learned that a lot. As far as my choice of academia, to get into academia, I would say yes, it was influenced a lot by my father. But he gave us the choice. I have 2 other siblings. He gave us the choice. But whatever you decide to do, do it properly and do it with a good conscience and a moral conscience. One last point. What really influenced the person I am today is the discipline I learned from my participation in athletics. I used to run for Singapore. I was a sprinter. And I used to wake up at 4:30 in the morning every day, train, go to school, come back, and again train in the evening. Twice a day training. It really put that discipline in me that if I don't win the race next month, at least I can win it maybe 3 months down the road. So it's discipline and patience. I learned that. So if Malaysia doesn't revamp its universities, I'm patient, I'll wait. But I'm not going to stop pursuing that.
Fantastic.
I'm more of a lazy bugger, and I'm not very competitive. I just get by on my good looks and charm. When my parents put a lot of pressure on us on the education side, to be honest, it was for pragmatic reason. Yeah. They saw that as a way to get out of poverty. The best thing that my parents, especially my mother, hoped for was for me to have a makan gaji job. Any makan gaji job, a teacher, a clerk, whatever, as long as it is a makan gaji job, because the reality for us in those days was, if you don't wake up, you don't work, you don't eat. You know, like what they say, kais pagi, makan pagi. So they were not brilliant philosophers who knew the worth of education and all that. So the main reason why they were pushing for education is because it's a key to a better life, and which is perfectly fine. The problem is that you don't even see much of that anymore. Even if people who are not well off, even the people or the squatters, whatever, you don't see these people putting the pressure on their children to get a good education. It's back to the outsourcing thing to say, I need to go and earn a living, give them to the ustaz, give them to the school, give them to the teachers, give them to the tuition center and all that, and let them do their job. So there's no motivation to push for it. There's no quality control. There's no review to say that, hey, this is not working. We need to go and do something else. And it's not because they're stupid. It's just that they themselves are victims of prior generation. So this is like a snowball that gets worse and worse and worse over time. And I'm basically a pessimist when it comes to this kind of thing. I would really, really hope that it will not go the way that we think is going. But if I'm a betting person, I wouldn't be betting on any improvement anytime soon.
Well, the good thing is that we can take matters into our own hands, and we can take control of the lives of our children in some certain respects, and we don't have to outsource everything to all these entities, right? Because they have clearly shown themselves to be deficient. In conclusion, both of you, can we say, I mean, because of the collective age of us three here today is nearly 200 years now, but I'm just being too high, but we're there or thereabouts, right? So we have the perspective of the years we've lived on this earth. We've had this perspective of meeting successful people, meeting good people, and meeting not so good people, right? What do you think, respectively, are the attributes of a person of substance and, dare I say it, success? Because success does not necessarily mean financial wealth, right? It means being successful in other parts, whatever those other parts are. Both of you, what to you are good, successful individuals?
Well,
as a template for reverse engineering.
It's a huge question, but I think
it doesn't have to be, though, right?
It doesn't have to be, but for the sake of brickbats who might say that my answer or our answer would be simplistic, I would say very basically, a good human being to me is somebody who has a critical mind, who is able to discern, and who is able to put that into good use by being a compassionate human being. So what is compassion? It's to have good moral values.
But compassion doesn't pay the bills, though, right?
Right. You paying the bills, I mean, my electricity bill is about 110 ringgit a month. And
so much.
Wait, I have 4 air conditioning units. I don't have them running every day, and it's very hot. I will decide how to choose make a choice how you want to pay your bills and how much you want to spend make a choice, make a calculated choice as to what kind of lifestyle you want. Because are you going to be a slave to your savings or the money or the bills that you generate? I'm not saying go to the mountain and sit cross-legged and live, the twilight years that way so you don't pay bills. Let's be realistic. But being realistic is also how you interact with your fellow human beings. And one has to be compassionate, polite, ethical, to accept diversity. Whatever country you live in, the world is diverse. Learn the value of how to get along. My parents taught me that. Get along. Whether you have political ambitions or not, whether you have the ambition to be a millionaire when you are 15 years old, go ahead. It's a choice you make. But learn how to be compassionate with your fellow human beings. Get along.
I've been to the mountain and sat cross-legged, and it's vastly overrated.
I've seen that happen as well. It's not pretty.
The way I judge people is I have this very vague way of saying that, are you an interesting person? So you're either interesting or you're boring. And to me, if all you do is make money and have a lot of money and only ever talk about money and about what your money can buy and how much more money you're going to have and blah, blah, blah and all that, then you're a very boring person. And unless I absolutely have to, I would stay clear away from you. I find somebody interesting who have a multifaceted life. Who have multiple interests, who's very good at taking care of himself or herself, so that person is not a burden on society, can earn a living, can make a good living and all that, but have other interests, interest in life, interest in people, interest in diversity, interest in knowledge, interest in what happened in the past, which is history, interest in what's going to happen in the future, which is all of the questions that we keep asking, then I consider such person interesting. And how much money he or she has no bearing on that question. And all my life, I would rather go with the interesting people, not the boring people,
I think I saw that in Tibet as well. So your critics might say, Adzhar, because you have made a bit of money in your past through your work, right? You can have the luxury of saying that. But for the guy who's struggling financially, he was saying, what nonsense, right? How can you have all that interest without having a bit of money to do that in the first place, right?
Okay, fair enough. But I grew up very poor. I grew up poor enough such that certain time we're not quite sure where the next meal is going to come from. But even in those days, I've always found certain thing interesting and certain thing boring. And even in those days, just the pure pursuit of money and making more of this and more of that and all that kind of stuff, it just never appealed to me. And after I started working and started doing relatively well, corporate-wise and all that kind of stuff, I started making choices that I don't see many other people make. I never took my job that seriously. I always found it amazing why the people paying me money to go prancing around like some idiot, singing company song and all that kind of stuff. And I managed to get out of it before they found out and fire me. So I never took myself too seriously. I always, I wanted to do a good job because, hey, somebody's paying me. And it wouldn't be halal if I take all of the money and I don't give back in return. So that wouldn't be right. So I do the best that I can to deliver the best that I can. But there are so many other facets of my life that I care about. And most of those don't necessarily require money. Yeah, some of them, like the travel that I do, require me to spend more money than I want to. But it's a choice that I make, and other people who have the same amount of money. Okay, fair enough. If somebody were to look at me and say, I don't have the money to make the choice that you make, I fully understand that, and my sympathy will go to that person. But I have so many other people who have as much money or even more money, but who never made that choice, who would rather be putting their nose to the grindstone, trying to add more and more money into their bank account. And I read somewhere, which really was an eye-opener, that say that the saddest thing that could happen to you in life is to be the richest on the day that you die.
Oh,
can you believe that? You're piling up money, and then boom,
you just go.
You die. You just go. That is really pathetic, and that is the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody. Now, of course, you don't know when you're going to die, so you cannot have an app to calculate how much you should be spending so that it becomes zero on the day that you die. So you do have some money in your back pocket and some reserve and all that kind of thing. But other than that, you only go through this thing once,
Yeah, you got one life, man. Go and live it, right?
I would say what would make me happy for the rest of the hopefully decades that I have left, I would be really happy if I can see a leadership, a value system that has changed in our leadership. Because when we do get leaders who finally realize and have that aha or eureka moment and say, my gosh, we've got to change the education system. Let's do it. The day that happens and the day I see them actually doing it is the day I will be happiest in my grave or heading towards my grave.
Do you see my face scrunch up in...
Yes. Well, I'm optimistic in that sense, but I'm a pessimist as well because I know it's not going to happen. At least I'm predicting it won't happen. But politics is unpredictable, isn't it? So let's hope that it might happen.
Yeah. If I were to be practical, and I would have to be practical because otherwise, we're not going to get very far, I would address the parents of today's children. I would say to them, you must take responsibility for how your children grow up. You must always be asking the right question. Are they being educated properly? Are they learning all of the right thing? And if you don't see that happening, do something. Join the PIBG group or whatever, or write letters to your MPs or raise noise, but do something. Don't just be totally oblivious to what's happening with your children's education because you find it convenient to outsource it and let somebody else deal with it. Because this lepas tangan thing is how we got here. Yeah. Whereas luckily in my case, my parents grew up, they never lepas tangan. They were always following up on my education, even though they have no idea what they're talking about. My mother would ask my teacher, how's Adzhar doing in school? Is he reading the book? And my teacher will always say, yeah, he's reading book, but he's not reading textbook. And I would get it because my mother couldn't differentiate between books and textbook. To her, there's only textbook, whatever the school wanted to do. So she was rather simplistic in that way. But then what do you expect from somebody of her generation? But she cared about the fact that I must be reading. If I'm not reading book, I'm not doing my homework or whatever, even though she have no idea what I was doing, I will get into a lot of trouble.
And I think gone are the days where in the Malaysian context, we should be so focused on language nationalism. We are not so caught up, and the parents are also caught up in whether we should know English or stick to Malay. There shouldn't be a choice. The fact is, you need to know both.
Well, the more languages you have, the better, right?
The more languages you know, the better. But reality is, English is important. It is an important language. So, let's stop pussyfooting around in terms of, no, Malay is what we have to master. English is a colonial language. I mean, that is a passé argument. So I would say parents have to be more involved in this.
True. Language is wealth. The more languages you have, the wealthier you are. As simple as that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with learning languages. In fact, one of the things that I do tell young couple, those who have children maybe in the early teens or whatever, is get them to learn a major world language over and above what we already have, which is probably Malay, English and Chinese or whatever it is. Learn a major European language, whether it is French or German or Spanish, or learn Korean or learn Japanese, because there is a practical reason for that. If you go to the Anglophone country, UK, US or whatever, the cost of studying there is humongously expensive, unbelievable, because I've sent children there and I had to pay for their education. They were absolutely expensive. But you can get similar quality education in a German university for probably half the price.
Because free, actually, if you learn German.
Exactly. Yeah. So you only have to pay for the cost of living. Yeah. And I had two children who went to study in Japan in Japanese. And it was way cheaper than the cost that I had to pay in England and in Australia. So there are some practical reasons. So, You got nothing to lose. You would learn one or two additional languages. You get to go and get quality education in some of the best universities on earth, and you don't have to pay what you would have had to pay if you had just followed the normal course of sending them to the Anglo countries.
Well, it's the same thing in Canada. If you send your kid to school in Canada, in university, you get it for free, but you've got to stomach the cultural propagation,
but what I'm saying
the
is
truth of it.
we have it here. We have the capability to be educated in English or to learn English. Why bother to go to the former colonial countries where we have all the facilities here, yet we are dumbing down or we are discouraging because we have this notion that it is a colonial language, we need to reject it. This either-or attitude is setting us back. So
to take a hard fork in the road now and to take the discussion to a separate or into a different lane, we've talked about education and the whys and wherefores, but what about in generality? How do you think Malaysia is doing? Where is Malaysia right now in the broader context of what's happening in the world, America's in a mess. That's quite clear. The UK is in a mess. That's quite clear. The whole of Europe is in a mess. That's quite clear. So is Malaysia as bad as we think it is?
No.
What's your net summary?
In the context of global events and where we are within Southeast Asia, I think we are generally still okay. We have very serious internal problems. Yes, we do. Ethnically, we are fractured. But I see this ironing out as the decades go on, and I may not be around to see this happening. But I'm living through the one crisis after another, and so far we're still functioning. We haven't gone into disorganized riots and killing left and right that we see in many other countries. So let's give ourselves credit for that. Yeah. And it's because of the people. Yeah. We are not parang wielding left and right every other day because we hate our neighbor. Let's give ourselves credit for that.
Yeah. I agree with that because I think one of the strengths of Malaysian that we sometimes don't give enough credit for is that we always step back from the brink. In the 60 years, almost 70 years that we've been independent, we have not gone over the brink. Yeah, we approached it on a few occasions and we almost slipped on a few occasions, but we haven't gone over the edge. And long may that continue. Where are we in the world? Well, actually, we're not too bad because there are some other countries which are even worse than us.
Oh, for
but
sure.
That's not the question, isn't it? The issue is why aren't we better when we have everything?
Yeah.
The potential and the capabilities and the resources and all that for us to be better. Should we be as good as Singapore? I don't think it's going to be that easy. Singapore is just a small nation state. They don't have to worry about mass flooding. They don't have to worry about building school in the middle of a jungle and all that. So we can't compare ourselves against them. Maybe Kuala Lumpur can compare against Singapore, but nation-wise, we have other challenges. We have other issues. But we could easily have done better. I think we sidetracked over the last few decades because of politics, because of race-based politics, and increasingly because of the influence of religion in politics. But we really could have. We are not too bad because other people were screwing up too, but we really should have been better.
Do you think the social equilibrium in Malaysia has been maintained because of the social policies? And if in fact that is the case, then does that mean that, for example, policies like the NEP are here to stay permanently?
Are they here to stay permanently?
Do you think that because we've got social peace, despite all the stuff that's been going on in the past, right? Do you think it's because of those policies? And in fact, if that is the case, then does that mean we've got to live with these social policies forever?
I think because of how religion and politics and ethnicity are so intertwined and being abused by our political leadership, we cannot sit on our laurels and say that we're forever going to have this social, this peace. There's bound to be a breaking point. So we have to consider, people who do think about this and who do project and who think about the future. We have to caution the people and the leadership that don't take advantage of the relative peace that we have.
But what I'm saying is, because we've got social policies that enable this peace to happen, then these social policies will continue to be in place
They are breaking
for
down.
the long term. Yeah.
They are-
Well, they certainly were needed back in the 70s because of what happened in 1969. The intention were all good, they were pure, and the implementation in the early days were also pretty good.
So how do we, I mean, just now offline, Adzhar, we talked about how when you were traveling through Iran, petrol was 13 cents a litre. And even now, at $88 a barrel, that's unfeasible for the government to keep going. In Malaysia, we've got petrol at 205, and even then, that's unfeasible, right? There comes a time when such policies will live past their useful gain, right? But to get them off, to get the country off these policies, these privileges, and the social policies is the biggest one, right? It's almost impossible.
It is almost impossible because I think we have gone past the correct period when we can wean ourselves away from those policies. Now we have become dependent on it. We have become addicted to it. When I talk about we, I'm talking more about the Malays who are the beneficiary, mostly the beneficiary of the affirmative actions. I think we have become incredibly insecure. So regardless of the fact that we are probably outnumbering everybody by 2 to 1, given the fact that we are having more children and our population growing in absolute term and in relative term, we have become even more scared and more insecure every day because many people realize that the privilege that they have, the job, the wealth and all that, didn't come from them being competitive and winning the game, but became because of certain advantages conferred to them by law and by politics. So it's going to be very difficult to take it away the same way that Iran cannot take away a 15 cent per litre petrol because there can be people on the street. But it has been done. Indonesia did take away the subsidy many years ago. There was some problem, but they survived, and look at where they are now. They are in a much, much better position. Somebody needs to start talking about it. Somebody needs to start talking about the fact that all of these things is making us weak and not making us strong. It's making us wealthy, perhaps, undeservedly if we don't earn it, but it's also making us weak and scared and frightened and insecure.
Insecure and lacking of confidence. I mean, no community likes to be told, here's a leg up, here's a handout, for you to survive. I mean, there is an internal sense of we're not good enough, therefore we need the help. How can that be a positive to any society?
Absolutely nonsense.
So the thing is, there has to be political will. There has to be a group of leaders who are willing to put their foot out and lose their position on account of these morally and ethical upright policies. There has to be, my father, for instance, who was the Vice Chancellor of UM in 1989 to 91, he knew by imposing different promotion policies, he was going to be unpopular. And yes, he was. He had to step down because he promoted ethnicities that were not, kosher or not halal. So he lost his position, but he was willing to do that. So likewise, if there are politicians who are willing to start the conversation, to start weaning us off the handouts, and to start thinking in terms of a level playing field, in terms of entrance into universities based on meritocracy as opposed to quotas, then let that politician be prepared to lose his or her position. So we need a coterie of MPs who are willing to do that.
One thing that reminds me of the old days, in the 60s when I was growing up, apart from the fact that my mother went to Sekolah Dewasa and flunked, was the fact that one of the government slogan then was this thing called Berdikari. Berdiri di atas kaki sendiri.
Ah, fantastic.
Oh, that was something
they should bring that back.
Oh, I've written about it. I kept writing about it, but I don't think there is much appetite at the top that talk about it.
I remember this. Yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful.
And there is the hectoring, the urging to say that you must stand on your own 2 feet.
Yes.
And if you are forever in need of the government to bail you out or to keep you standing or to take care of your own life, that's not what Berdikari is all about. And Berdikari is not a colonial thing. Berdikari was what we ourselves came up with after we became independent, after post-57. And then what happened to Berdikari now? Nobody talks about Berdikari. I care about it and I try very hard to be Berdikari, and I think I've been pretty successful.
In fact, actually what you say is very telling, because in fact the colonial practice is to dumb down the majority.
Yep.
Because it maintains peace.
Yeah.
You know, you tell the majority population
Learned that from the British, didn't we?
We learned it from it. So now we are a post-colonial, neo-colonial.
That's the point that I keep making. We are now being colonized by our own kind.
I know.
It's called coloniality at
That's
home.
painfully ironic, but it's the reality.
It is ironic. We are being
It is,
colonized by our own
and we
kind.
have one leader to blame for that, and you know.
Oh yeah, we know who that person
we
is.
should do another podcast to discuss this.
Well, let's do it now. Let's talk
well,
about it now.
Or maybe we can posthumously.
Yeah, but
Be less
whatever.
sensitive then.
But whatever it is, we have this. We are in a neo-colonial period of our governance, or our lack of governance, and our politics has deteriorated because we are heading backwards. And Berdikari, this is the value that we lost, and we are not able to instill this in the schools because the teachers themselves are unable to feel that. They themselves are feeling dumbed down and insecure.
And especially because the parents themselves don't think about Berdikari anymore.
What I sometimes, in fact, oftentimes struggle to comprehend is that because the policies that we have inherent in this country are by nature not long-term. It cannot go on forever because the chickens will come home eventually to roost. When you have social policies, that is a zero-sum game essentially, right? One benefits at the expense of another, and when that another is shrinking in size and the recipients are rising in size, we talk about sustainability. There is nothing sustainable about this policy. At its root, if people do give it a couple of moments of thought every day, they should realize that this cannot go on. You cannot keep on weakening yourself. But yet we continue to propagate this policy, and in fact we don't even talk about it in society. It's one of those subjects that is completely taboo in the country, right? I find that very difficult to comprehend. And in fact, if I was a politician, this would be something that I would use to galvanize the people, saying you can do this, you can stand on your own 2 feet, and it can be a very, very strong political manifesto. But you don't see that courage. So in the pantheon of priorities, and education is there. You got corruption, you got reform, you got this and that. Education is kicked further down the ladder, right? And that is the extent of Malaysia's problems.
I think this. Forgive me for hoarding this section, but I think change is going to come from the Borneo states.
It might well do.
We need to learn the values there. But on the other hand, they too are feeling so fed up. I mean, there's talk of secession, and you know, if you read social media, there's a lot of discussion about how frustrated Sabah and Sarawak is, and how also undeveloped they are. And but at the same time, the communities there feel differently about the diversity, as opposed to what we are in Malaya. So the
How
change.
do they feel differently?
Diversity is profit rather than something to condemn and to suppress. I mean, the communities there, the various ethnic groups get along. Islam is completely, the feeling about Islam and about Muslims, completely different there as opposed to here. So the fact that we have so many conferences, seminars, webinars, podcasts that are very Malaya-centric, this is a problem too. You know, the very country itself, our country is divided. You know, our mindset, we never think of Malaysia as, oh, it's also Sabah and Sarawak. You know, so you see this a lot on social media about how everything is so Malaya-centric. Yeah. And yet, Malaya is the one that is the major problem. If you see it, of course, Sabah and Sarawak have developmental issues, but that's because of the Malaya problem. You know, anyway, I'm not really an expert on Sabah and Sarawak, the problems and the politics, but community-wise, I mean, we are one country, and we have a lot to learn from Sabah and Sarawak.
The
You used to
irony,
work in Sabah, didn't you? You had a business in Sabah.
that was personal business. Yeah. The irony is Semenanjung or Kuala Lumpur looked at Sabah and Sarawak literally the way that London used to look at Kuala Lumpur as a colony to be exploited. To see what resources is available, what can we do, what minimum do we need to do to keep the natives quiet.
Yeah. That's
And obviously
unfortunate.
things have changed a little bit now over the last few years because of the political dynamics, and I think that's for the better. I think people in Sabah and Sarawak fully recognize that they have some advantages that we have lost over here in Semenanjung, and I hope they'll keep them. They'll keep those advantages, and hopefully one day they can teach us in Semenanjung what does it take to live in a multiracial, multicultural country.
Yeah. So, what conclusions about life have we gleaned from our respective decades on this earth, and how do we position ourselves personally? I mean, for the next, 10, 20 years or 30 years that we are still on this mortal coil.
I won't go with anything too profound. I'll just go back to how we started this discussion about education. And Munirah, you talk a lot about the fact that we don't do things like the soft knowledge about philosophy and humanities and all that, which I think is a shame. But I also think that we don't do the sciences the right way either. I think we must understand the sciences not as it is a STEM subject that will get you good job and good paying job. We must understand them as saying that this is how you understand nature. Just like when we learn philosophy, this is how you understand human. You learn physics or you learn chemistry, this is how you understand how nature works. And there's a lot of beauty in that. And you must understand it because the world itself is becoming very, very complicated, very quantitative, very numerical. You can easily be cheated or be taken down the wrong road if you don't understand enough. You don't understand enough about data. You don't understand enough about, let's say, even something as simple, a percentage where a politician can come and throw numbers at you and you're gone. You don't understand enough about the impact of technology and on the environment, on society, on everything else. So I always like the idea of being a Renaissance man or woman or whatever it is, being interested in everything, being interested in the hard sciences, knowing what's happening with James Webb telescope up there, knowing what's happening in CERN in Geneva, but also are interested in the society, what is happening with society, what is happening with the old philosophers in Saudi Arabia, among the Middle East or Asia or even the Western philosophy, what happened with the arts. And there's so many things which are interesting. Remember the point that I made about interesting? To me, almost everything is interesting.
Yeah.
I think we need to be conscious of the fact that the world is global. The world isn't just big powers. The world isn't just the West. So we in Southeast Asia and Malaysia as part of Southeast Asia have to have a sense of pride that we are distinct. At the same time, we should not just be followers. Just because we are a small region and we have, big powers in our midst like China and the US, we also have to teach the rest of the world that we have a value system that you guys have to learn from us.
And we've even seen our government outsource policy to the consulting firms.
No, but that's nonsense.
It's nonsense.
For me, to have pride in being a Malaysian as well as a Southeast Asian means we have to call out these powers for the immoral behavior that they do
100%.
practice. So, that's my concluding statement, is that let us find pride in who we are and drop the political acts, about deferring to this consulting firm based in New York or another consulting firm based in London. Tap our own sources. We have our own resources. But to do that, you must have the political will. And I'll conclude with that.
Yeah. When I first started this podcast nearly 5 years ago, I told myself that I would try as much as possible to not talk to anybody from the West. I would only talk to Asians. And if you see the people I've had on the podcast, I think there's only ever been one non-Asian. Maybe only two out of a few hundred. And I think that really we do need to take our place in this world. There's enough of us to really stand up and be counted. And we can be really what we can be without too much encumbrance if we had the will to do so. Fantastic feedback from both of you. Thank you for your time. and amazing conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Sean.
much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Munirah.
Thank you.